It's easy to exaggerate and talk about an issue being life and death. But when we talk about inequality, when we talk about how expensive healthcare is, we are talking about life and death situations, life and death circumstances. Let's look at some data from a Brookings Institute study. When you're 55, how long are you going to live on average? From 55, how far will you get? Well, it turns out when you look at a huge number of people, they looked at thousands of Americans. When you break it down by what you were making, your income at 55, your chances of living much longer can be much less if you're not making nearly as much money. Here's the chart. The richest 10%, the people who are making the most income at 55, on average, would live 34.9 years. Now you're seeing there's two different cohorts that they studied. The more recent one is the one that I'm more interested in, of course. It's a little bit smaller for those born in 1920, but not for 1940, we're looking at 35 more years. That's a good long life. I mean, I have relatives who didn't reach that long, which is incredibly sad. The poorest 10%, though, not so lucky, 24.2. Now look, for the poorest people in America, you're certainly doing better than in many disadvantaged countries around the globe. But we're talking about 12 years, almost 13 years less than those making the most money. When you get into your 60s and 70s, wouldn't you like to have an extra decade? I mean, that's like, we talk about things being valuable, having value. A decade, now that is valuable. That's something that apparently money can buy. That was for the men. It's actually worse for the women. Let's look at this. Richest 10%, 35.3 more years, a little bit higher than the men if you were in the richest 10% income when you're a 55-year-old woman in that 1940 cohort. Poorest 10%, 25.8. But the most important fact there, and why I said it's worse, it's actually worse in the 1940 cohort than it was in the 1920 cohort. They don't explain exactly why that might be. We can certainly speculate about changing workplaces and things like that women in more recent decades will have worked in. But that's something that you don't see when you look at the men's side. And so for women, this is an even more significant issue. To sum it up, the Brookings Institute researchers say life expectancy is rising for those at the top of the distribution of individuals, but it is stagnant or declining for those at the bottom. And look, we've been sort of implying that there are significant costs to these differences in income. Let's talk about those costs. A recent study conducted by Harvard researchers estimated that as many as 17,000 people will die directly as a result of their states refusing to expand Medicaid. Now, this is the confluence of this sort of academic research and the actual reforms that we've been trying to make in America, i.e. the Affordable Care Act. One of the big portions of it was expanding Medicaid. So that those people, the 10% poorest, a little bit higher than that, the people we've been talking about in these charts will have some basic health insurance. They'll have access to medicines and procedures and things like that. Now, fucking dickbag Republican governors have refused it in a number of states. And look, 17,000 people from this one study done at Harvard will die because of that. They don't have the insurance now because the Republican governors refused to expand Medicaid. And thousands of people are going to die. 17,000. Maybe you can do some quick math for me. How many 9/11s is that? How many fucking Benghazis is that? Fox got so worked up over a couple of people who died tragically in Benghazi. How about you get worked up about the 17,000 Americans who are going to die needlessly, who could live if the Republican governors would simply implement legislation that had passed, that the president had signed, that the Senate had okayed, that the House had okayed, and that the Supreme Court ruled to be constitutional. How about we save those 17,000 Americans? I think that that's something that we should all be able to get behind. And so this is something that seriously needs to be continued to be studied. We're talking about more than 10 years in America, where we're all supposed to be relatively advantaged. That's a huge gap, man. That should infuriate you. And like I said, we need more reforms. We need more progress. We've done some things for the healthcare system. Obamacare did have a number of great elements to it, but it's not enough. If expanding Medicaid in the way that the ACA did can save those 17,000 people conceivably, what if we expanded it to everyone? What if you didn't have to go through the convoluted, incredibly expensive private health insurers that were the backbone of the ACA? Dare to dream, I suppose. Anyway, incredibly significant. Let me know what you think about it down below the like button in those comments.